Hey everyone, welcome back to my classroom. So this video is particularly for my high school students who are on quarantine right now. The rest of us are face-to-face, and I have some high school students that are out and they're on quarantine and they might be out for a couple of weeks. So it gives them an opportunity for them to work at home on their projects. I have the bins ready to go. They're getting picked up by their parents. I'll go over what's in the bin in a minute, but there's tools in the bin, clay, projects. There are some things outside of the bin as well that you will need. I'm going to go over some of the things that you might need to provide at home, and also I'm going to go over how to work with clay at home in your home little space and how to do it safely. So we're going to go over all that in this video. Hopefully this is helpful to you all so you can all work on your projects, be successful, and be safe about it. The first thing that I want to address today is the safety concerns and the materials tips that I have provided. There is a QR code on the top of all of the tool bins. Scan that and it will take you to this document. So this document will be linked on our Schoology page, and this goes over some information on cleaning and also some materials tips. So let's start out with the tips on cleaning. So as my students know from having worked in clay the past couple weeks at school, we always try to clean the clay up while it's wet rather than dry. This helps keep down dust, which we don't want to breathe in because, of course, silica is dangerous to be breathing in. The next thing is when you are cleaning your table surface and your floor while it's wet, you want to really make sure you're getting it all off. Clay can be very abrasive, and if you don't get it all off, you can actually kind of damage the finish of your table or your floor if you have it tracked around or kind of rub it in. Next, be careful with technology. You don't want to get clay on your Chromebooks or your phones. You can always slip it in a Ziploc bag if you can't wash your hands off beforehand, or you could put plastic wrap around it. Avoid working on a carpeted area because, of course, clay, if it gets in the carpet, it's going to be hard to get out. A suggestion would be to put down something like plastic, like an old shower curtain on the floor. Now, when you're using a cup or container of water, don't dump the residual clay down your drain because that can cause a problem with your plumbing. You want to dump off the water perhaps, but then you can dump the clay or residue outside. If you have aprons or towels that you're using, you also might want to pre-rinse those in another bucket or with a hose before you actually put them in your washing machine. It will again help keep clay down. Now, some general tips with working on clay. Keep in mind that clay materials are not healthy to eat. So you don't want to eat in an area where you are trying to work. Try to keep it out of the primary eating area. Try to keep it out of your kitchen if possible. But if it's not possible to keep it separate, then clean like crazy. Keep clay, tools, and your projects out of the reach of small children and pets because you never know what curious ones will put into their mouth. Try to work on a porous surface. I'm providing you with canvas, but you could also work on newspaper if you want to, or a piece of unfinished plywood. Let's talk about the damp boxes. If your damp box is a little too moist, you can leave the lid open for a few hours to allow it to dry out. If it's not wet enough, you can add a little bit of moisture by dampening the plaster some. If you are working outside, which is great, just be careful to protect your pieces from direct sunlight or breeze because it can actually cause cracking. Now, if you need to dry your pieces outside of the damp box for a bit, maybe it's a little too moist in the damp box and you want to dry them out, use some old towels to help control the drying. It will help allow your projects to dry a little bit more evenly. I usually tell students just try it for about 6 to 12 hours, see how it's drying, check it. If you need to allow it dry more, you can still dry it more, but you want to watch it so it doesn't dry out too much. Don't leave it a whole day without checking it. For the slab work, I am providing you a carpet tubing section in lieu of a rolling pin, but you could use anything that's round and flat. Like I picture right there, there's a bottle or like a can, like a scrubbing bubbles can type of a thing. Okay, and now I have a little section about things that you might need to supply at home, things that are not going to be in your kit. Have a little container that you can use for water or for slip. If you wanted to use the vinegar that I'll mention a little bit later, you could do that. A larger container for washing up to kind of pre-rinse your hands, your sponges, whatever it is, to avoid getting the clay down the drains. Perhaps an apron or an old shirt that you could use to protect your clothing. Also, I had mentioned it earlier in the sheet, but I didn't mention it out loud. You might want some shoes to wear in your special clay area just to keep clay from the rest of your house. If you have designated shoes, it's helpful. Maybe a few old towels to help control drying and also for cleanup. And you could use a cleanup sponge or a cloth. Just don't use the same dish sponge that you use on your dishes. Perhaps a couple of plastic bags, like, just a checkout bag from a store to help wrap your things if you need it. You might need an old maybe metal spoon. You can use it for digging, texturing, burnishing. A couple of old spray bottles that you can put water in to spritz water on your clay or your recycle. Some white vinegar is helpful to use as slip. And then the last item right here is really great. These are graters. So students, that we use in the classroom, we use these mud tool shredders. These are totally awesome. And remember how they work like a cheese grater? They're really great for cleanup, but they're also pretty expensive, and I don't have enough to give you those in your bins. So here is my Dollar Tree knockoff that I would recommend. Ta-da! It's $1 at the Dollar Tree. Okay, or they have a big one, but the small one is kind of cool. So if you have the ability to have someone stop by the Dollar Tree and pick up one of these, it's kind of cool because it will work in the same manner. See, isn't that cool? So save you some money there. Let's see, and then lastly, I talk about some of the things that I've mentioned before, like the pre-rinse bucket. Okay, disposing of water outside, not in your drains, and recycling of clay. So this is the one thing that is going to be new for you all. Okay, and so for this last tip right here, it's talking about recycling clay. I just want to explain this part to you. My Ceramics 1 kids haven't experienced this yet. Ceramics 2, they already know what's happening here with this. But for Ceramics 1, inside of your bin, along with whatever project, if the kids are on quarantine, that means that they already have a project in here and I'm sending these home. So I have a few kids that are out on quarantine because they were exposed. So I have their pot in here and then I have some clay that they can use. And in the case of like Ceramics 2, their recycled clay is already in here. So what you want to do is when you're working with clay, when you have leftover clay that at the end of the session, it's been sitting out for a while and it's kind of dried. So in the case of that, you would take whatever clay that you have left over and break it up into little bits. Now, then you could do one of two things. You could either dip it in some water, okay, to re-moisten it, or you could, say, spritz it down with a bottle to re-moisten it. But whatever you do, take those little pieces that are broken up, spritz or wet them down, and then toss them loosely back in your bag. Now, you don't squish them back together at this point because you want them to remain loose so they can absorb the moisture that they lost. So you stick that clay to be recycled back inside of your bag and then zip that back up. Now, let's hypothetically say you have some pieces laying out that, oh man, you forgot about it. It's bone dry. So here's what you can do with that. You could dip those in water, set them inside the bin, like on the plaster or on the paper towel part, okay? So let them sit, close it up for a day or so, check it the next day. If it's still kind of on the hard side, dip them again, set them in the plaster. Now the reason I'm not throwing the hard pieces back into the bag to be recycled is because that would make that stuff chunky. So we want to slowly bring the bone dry stuff back. So by dipping it in water, putting it on the plaster, let it sit for a day, dip it, put it in there, it will eventually bring it back to that leather hard and then eventually plastic. And when it gets soft enough, stick it back into your bag of reclaim. Okay, now here I want to explain the damp box slightly. So there's plaster in the bottom of the damp box, that's the white stuff, and then I have a paper towel on top of it. The purpose of the paper towel is to prevent any plaster residue from getting onto the pot. This plaster is still rather fresh and it does have a little residue, so we want to be careful not to get plaster mixed into the clay whatsoever. So, the plaster is damp currently, and it will help to keep a very damp environment in the little plastic tub. Now, if it's a little too damp in there, you can leave the lid open and allow it to dry out some. Or if it gets too dry, if the plaster is not keeping your clay moist, you can add a few ounces of water to the plaster and just pour it right on the plaster and it'll soak it up like a sponge. So the plaster can be regulated wetter or drier depending on what you need, and you can leave your lid open or closed. Also, if you need to dry your piece out a little bit more, you can remove it from the tub, put a dry towel over it, and keep watch over it for 6 to 12 hours and allow it to dry some. So let's talk about the items that are getting sent home with students today. All the bins are ID'd. I just have covered up the identification on here for privacy purposes, but they all have the kid's name on it. They have a bin number. It says what bell the student is in, that sort of thing. So first of all, there's going to be a work surface. There's the canvas surface. Now, when you fold this up at the end, sponge it off. You can clean it off with a towel. Fold the dirty side in, so you're always keeping the dirty side in, okay? And you can keep that with your bin. You might not want to necessarily put it in your bin because then it'll absorb some of that moisture. You can just set it on top. Inside the tool part of your bin, you will find a small sponge for working in clay. Now, for people, the couple Ceramics 1 kids that I have that are working on their pots, you can use the sponge on the earthenware clay only. Earthenware clay that we have right now, this is standard 103, it doesn't have grog, so you can sponge that. But in the future, do not sponge anything that is stoneware. Okay, because our stoneware has grog in it, and if you sponge it, you're going to get a real unattractive groggy surface that will affect your glaze. Okay, you also have some paintbrushes in here. You have a big one, a medium one, and a little baby one. Now, the medium one, I have made a tip on it. This is like a Kemper tool, and I use this sort of tip all the time for like blending things, maybe attaching handles and stuff like that. On this one, this has been sanded to form a nice straight edge that can be utilized as like a scraper. So like on the inside of, say, this piece, I could use it as a scraper. Okay, it works really, really well. All right, then I have, this is the other end of the green brush. It was really long, so I had to cut them. But I thought, well, I'll do another little pointy wooden end, so that's a carving tool. You've got a wooden knife. Now, this is great for lots of different uses. We use a wooden knife that's a Kemper wooden knife. It also has a nice round end. Again, you could blend with that, or you could cut with this end. There's a wooden fork. Again, you can blend, you could score, you could texture, you could do lots of different things with that. You have a little tool that I made. This is a needle tool. So if you're maybe cutting out things, marking things, you can use the needle tool. This is a carving tool, and I'm going to just say it's kind of delicate, so you want to be careful with it. But this is great if you are wanting to do some carved lines. You can see that the clay, when you carve it like that, the clay just goes right through, so that's pretty cool. This one, because this is made from a steel measuring tape, do make sure that you're getting that cleaned out at the end. When I've got some clay in there, you want to make sure you're getting it cleaned out and get it dried off. I'll clean that in a bit. You have a couple of ribs. So you have a rib that I have cut that is a kidney-shaped rib. This is great for when we have, say, something like this where you need to clean the inside or you need to clean the outside. It is flexible enough that you can curve it. Just don't bend it like crazy because you don't want to snap it, but that's very handy. There's also a nice straight edge flat rib. These are hotel key cards that I got as a donation. There is a little scrap piece of a rib, and this is a great little scoring tool. So whenever you're adding clay to another piece, when you guys are seeing some of my videos that I score, you can use this. This is a great little tool for that. Okay. And lastly, there is a clay cutter. It's just fishing line with some washers attached to it, and you can just slice it through your clay. You could also use anything like dental floss for something like that. So these are your tools that you have available. Use the sheet that I've given to you. Hopefully this makes any, oh, and I have a couple of people right now who are on quarantine who might need some underglaze. Now, I did not give you guys a lot of choices on this, so sorry about that. But this is black underglaze, and I have given you an application, a glaze brush. This is a soft, fluffy brush. It's different from the brushes in the bins. You want to use soft and fluffy to apply your underglaze so it goes on evenly. And I'll be showing you guys that in a video. So hopefully that makes sense. Shoot me any questions that you have. Kids, you have my email. For anyone who wants the document that I am passing out to the kids, I will link that in the video description if that helps. Okay, good luck. Thanks everyone. Bye. I almost forgot to mention Ceramics 2 kids. I am putting these the carpet tubes, which are going to be in lieu of a rolling pin. I'm putting these in your bins right now. Ceramics 1, if we end up by going remote for everyone, I'll give these to you all as well.